For thousands of years, wheat has been a mainstay of civilization. Originally a wild grass from the eastern Mediterranean, wheat is now cultivated throughout the world. In fact, more agricultural land is committed to growing wheat than any other crop. I'm Mike Gidley from UQ School of Agriculture and Food Sciences. Here in Australia we have 3 wheat growing regions. Spreading from central western Queensland to southwest Western Australia, each region has climate and soil types suited to growing different varieties of wheat. The northern region produces hard wheat, a type of wheat used mainly in the making of European-style breads and Asian-style noodles. The southern and western regions are suited to growing standard white wheat, typically used in flat breads like those found in the Middle East. It is also used in Asian baked products and noodles. The western region also grows soft wheat, the type commonly used in the making of biscuits, pastries and cakes. As scientists, we're interested in the properties that differentiate one type of wheat from another, and how best to use those properties to make the high-quality foods that we all like to eat. To explain more about these properties, here's Bruce Darcy.
We classify wheat as hard, standard white or soft, depending on how much protein is contained in the grains, the seed from which we mill flour. Protein is an important component in our foods as it supplies essential amino acids our bodies need. Protein levels can be measured using the Kjeldahl system. This 3-stage process consists of digestion, distillation and titration. Digestion in acid breaks down the flour. Distillation in alkali produces ammonia gas, which is collected in water. Titration of the final solution is used to measure the amount of protein in the flour. A soft wheat flour will have a protein content below 9.5%, while a hard wheat will be above 13 to 14% protein. Standard white wheat protein falls between the 2 ranges. But the total protein content is not the end of the story. Melissa Fitzgerald has more.
Wheat doesn't contain just one kind of protein. Different varieties of wheat contain different types of proteins. This procedure is called gel electrophoresis, a technique that reveals the different proteins contained in flour. When complete, the process produces a visual display in which the horizontal bars down the chart represent different proteins. In this side-by-side example, 2 different wheats reveal their different protein contents. Wheat A is from good bread-making flour, while wheat B is from a not-so-good flour. Notice how some proteins are present in one wheat and missing from the other. By understanding the types of proteins in flour, we can judge what kind of food a particular variety of wheat might be ideally suited for. And there is a particular class of proteins responsible for making the kind of bread that I love to eat. Have you ever pulled apart a newly baked loaf and stolen out the soft, warm centre? It's the protein complex gluten that is responsible for this loaf's structure, strength and texture. Gluten is developed in the dough when proteins absorb water and are pulled and stretched during the kneading process. As the proteins are worked, they become long, flexible strands. Yeast, another ingredient of bread, produces gases in the dough, mainly carbon dioxide. The protein strands trap the gas bubbles and the dough expands as more carbon dioxide is produced. When we put the bread in the oven, the gluten strands coagulate or solidify, giving us that characteristic bubbly appearance of bread. This micrograph shows the influence of gluten in creating the structural framework of bread. As seen here, the bread with gluten has large bubbles, while gluten-free bread is dense with smaller bubbles. In this chart from the gel electrophoresis system, we can see different gluten proteins. These gluten proteins are the high molecular weight subunits, and they are assigned different numbers. The number indicates which gene the protein came from.
And did you know it is the absence of gluten that explains why it is so hard to make bread from rye, rice, potato or oat flour? I am Nidhi Bansal and I would like to show you something. Look at this nutritional information panel. Notice how it lists gluten as one of its ingredients. This suggests that a cheaper flour with lower protein content has been used in the manufacture of the bread. Without the added gluten, the loaf from that flour may well have turned out like this one. This loaf was made with a softer flour, better suited to cake making. It is low in protein content and as a result has a texture that is flatter, denser and with fewer bubbles than the one Melissa likes, that's made from hard high protein flour. These aspects of texture can be quantified using this texture analyzer. It imitates the eating experience of the bread in the human mouth and can predict bread quality measurements such as firmness, springiness, and chewiness. The computer provides a graphical display by which the textural properties of different breads can be compared in a scientifically objective way.
Starch is another component found in wheat. Where gluten is a protein, starch is a carbohydrate and supplies energy to your body. Starch also plays a role in the production of a daily loaf of bread and is particularly responsible for the crustiness and most importantly the freshness of bread. The rapid viscoanalyzer test measures the peak viscosity developed during the wetting and subsequent gelatinization of the starch granules in flour. Higher the peak viscosity, higher the starch content in the dough. For example, the flour used for making cakes has a higher peak viscosity than flour utilized for bread making, meaning cake flour has higher starch content than bread flour. Rapid viscoanalysis can also indicate flour unsuitable for dough making because it comes from damaged or sprouted grains. Flour from sprouted wheat grains results in a sticky dough that will cause problems during the commercial bread making process. While rapid viscoanalysis describes only one parameter, that is the peak viscosity used during the early stages of bread baking, rheology describes the whole bread baking process. This instrument, a rheometer, allows us to continuously monitor changes in the viscoelastic properties of the dough as a function of time and temperature, thereby simulating what happens in a baker's oven. The big challenge of food science is to turn all this knowledge into products that people will want to consume.
Australians like lots of different types of bread. Sometimes we like the tall loaves that are soft and fluffy. Sometimes we like loaves that have a firmer texture and the large air bubbles in the bread. And other types of bread like ciabatta and flatbreads. So by using the information that we are gathering, researchers are developing wheat varieties that produce better results in the kitchen for the different bread types. But growing enough hard wheat is difficult given our climate, the droughts in Queensland and soil types.
Just because we can develop a new variety of wheat doesn't mean it will produce flour that can be turned into the bread we want to eat. Sure, a food might be good for you, but if it doesn't look, smell, taste and feel palatable, we just won't eat it. It's got to appeal to our senses. Here in the Food Sensory Lab, we conduct trials where participants rate the qualities of any new bread being considered for the market. Most people are very subjective in the way they describe their experience with food. For instance, what exactly do we mean when we say a slice of bread tastes yummy? One person's idea of yummy might be quite different to another's. So, to narrow down the sensory properties of bread, we have developed techniques for quantifying consumer responses.
Once we know the properties of the bread that are appealing or less appealing, we try and find out which components of the bread are responsible. We use this instrument to analyse the aromas produced by the bread or by the flour. The sample is heated to release the gases that produce the distinctive bread smell. These gases are then examined to determine what they are comprised of. Once we know what makes up the aroma, we can match it to the descriptions from our sensory lab and then capitalise on the properties that produce the olfactory experience we like. But what happens after the bread has been baked? Mark Turner has more on the final piece of this puzzle.
We all know how irresistible a fresh loaf of bread can be. But leave it stored in the cupboard for a week and it's a different story. An important consideration for us is how long bread can be kept for before it becomes inedible. Bread contains living components like yeast, the ingredient we deliberately add to help bread rise. But the living components are also part of the reason bread goes stale. And by that, I don't just mean when it deteriorates and goes hard. Spoilage also occurs due to microbial contamination. Here in our food microbiology lab, we can test for loads of microorganisms in our food. Microbes feed on the bread, increasing in population and producing byproducts as they grow. Not only does this cause the bread to go off, but some of those byproducts can be harmful to us if we in turn eat them. Part of our research is to work out how long bread can be safely stored on the shelf and what we can do to minimise the risk to our own health.
Although the art of making bread is thousands of years old, the science of producing the better loaf is ongoing, innovative and at the forefront of research. From wheat growing in Australian fields to wheat-based products available in our shops, it is the science in food that enables the food industry to produce the variety, the quality and the safety that we as consumers have come to expect in our daily loaves of bread.